A powerful federal judge humiliates a Latino man in open court until she learns he is the most feared man in America, and her world shatters in front of everyone. The federal courthouse in downtown Houston stood tall, its marble pillars casting long shadows across the plaza as morning sunlight poured in. Inside, tension brewed as people shuffled into courtroom 6B. The atmosphere was heavy, charged with the kind of energy only a high-profile trial could bring. Reporters lined the back benches, their pens ready, cameras flashing discreetly whenever someone of interest entered the room. Lawyers whispered among themselves, clerks scurried with files, and spectators leaned forward with anticipation. At the center of it all sat Judge Eleanor Whitmore, a woman notorious for her sharp tongue and even sharper disdain for anyone she deemed beneath her. With her crisp black robe, platinum hair tied neatly in a bun, and glasses perched perfectly on her nose, she exuded authority. For years she had been both feared and admired in the federal judiciary, but her arrogance was her signature trait. To her, respect was not earned, it was demanded. The bailiff called the next case, the United States versus Miguel Alvarez. Heads turned as a Latino man in his mid-40s stepped forward. Miguel was calm, composed, and impeccably dressed in a dark tailored suit that contrasted against his warm brown skin. His stride was steady, his shoulders squared, his eyes sharp. Something about him radiated presence, commanding yet quiet. He wasn't handcuffed like most defendants. Instead, he carried himself with an unshakable confidence that unsettled those watching. The judge barely looked up. "State your name for the record." "Miguel Alvarez," he said firmly, his deep voice carrying across the courtroom. Her eyes finally lifted, sizing him up. A smirk tugged at the corner of her lips. "Ah, another one of you. Mr. Alvarez, you people seem to find yourselves here often." The words hung in the air like a slap. Gasps echoed. Even the court reporter paused her typing for a split second. Miguel's expression didn't flinch, but his jaw tightened. He could feel every eye on him, watching, waiting for his reaction. Judge Whitmore leaned back in her chair. "Do you even understand the gravity of the charges brought against you? Fraud, racketeering, conspiracy. These are not trivial accusations. Yet here you stand, smug, as if this is some kind of game." Her voice dripped with condescension. She gestured toward him dismissively like he was an inconvenience rather than a human being. The prosecutor, a young man desperate to please the judge, chimed in eagerly. "Your Honor, if I may, the evidence—" "Sit down, counselor," she snapped. "I don't need your hand-holding. I can see what's in front of me." She turned her glare back on Miguel. "What I see is yet another immigrant who thinks the law doesn't apply to him, who thinks he can outsmart the system." Whispers rippled through the crowd. Some exchanged uneasy glances. Others shook their heads. The racism was thinly veiled but unmistakable. Miguel's lawyer, a seasoned Latina attorney named Isabel Moreno, stood abruptly. "Objection, Your Honor. That language is inappropriate and prejudicial. My client deserves respect, not personal attacks." Judge Whitmore raised a brow, her smirk growing wider. "Oh, Ms. Moreno, spare me the theatrics. If your client wants respect, he should have earned it by not standing in my courtroom accused of federal crimes." The words stung, but Isabel remained steadfast. Miguel, however, finally spoke, not loud but deliberate. "With all due respect, Judge Whitmore, respect is not something you give or withhold based on your mood. It's the foundation of justice itself." The courtroom fell silent. His calm defiance struck a nerve. The judge's face hardened. "Are you lecturing me in my courtroom?" She spat. Miguel didn't back down. He held her gaze steady and unyielding. "No, Your Honor. I'm reminding you of what you've forgotten." The tension was unbearable. The spectators leaned forward. Reporters scribbled furiously. The prosecutor looked like he wanted to sink into the floor. Judge Whitmore's eyes narrowed. "Bailiff, place Mr. Alvarez in holding. Clearly he needs a lesson in humility before we proceed." Gasps filled the room. Isabel shot up again, furious. "This is outrageous. He's done nothing wrong." but the gavel slammed down. "Enough. Take him away." The bailiff moved toward Miguel, but something in the man's eyes made him hesitate. It wasn't fear. It wasn't anger. It was something else. Something dangerous. Something commanding. Miguel slowly stood, buttoning his jacket with deliberate calm. He leaned slightly toward the judge, his voice low but cutting. "Careful, Judge. You may think you're humiliating me, but you have no idea who you're dealing with." Her face twisted in disdain. "Is that a threat?" Miguel's lips curled into the faintest smile. "No, Your Honor. That's a warning." The gavel pounded again, echoing like a drumbeat. "Take him away." The bailiff escorted Miguel out, though unease lingered in the man's step. Isabel followed, seething with rage, knowing that this was more than just another courtroom battle. As the heavy wooden doors closed behind them, the whispers turned into a storm. Who was Miguel Alvarez? Why was he so calm in the face of humiliation? And why did his warning send a chill through even the most hardened prosecutor in the room? The judge sat back, confident in her power, but entirely unaware that she had just provoked the most feared man in America. The clang of the holding cell door echoed as Miguel Alvarez stepped inside, the bailiff shutting him in with a nervous look. The cell was stark, white walls, steel bench, the faint hum of fluorescent lights buzzing above. Most men would pace, sweat, or curse under their breath after being humiliated in front of a federal judge. But not Miguel. He sat calmly on the bench, hands folded, posture straight as if he owned the very air around him. His eyes were sharp, calculating. He wasn't just waiting, he was watching. The guards on duty shifted uncomfortably under his gaze, as though he could see right through them. Meanwhile, in the hallway outside, Isabel Moreno was pacing furiously. She stormed up to the bailiff. "You can't keep him in there. He hasn't violated any court order. That judge is on a power trip." The bailiff rubbed the back of his neck, clearly uneasy. "Look, ma'am, I just follow orders, but I'll tell you this. Your client isn't like the usual guys we see in here." Isabel's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" The bailiff hesitated, lowering his voice. The way he looked at the judge. I've seen men stare down barrels of guns and still look more nervous than he did. Whoever he is, he's not just some defendant. Isabel's anger softened into curiosity. She knew Miguel was important. His calmness under pressure had always set him apart. But now, with the judge humiliating him so publicly, Isabel worried about what might come next. Back inside the cell, Miguel's phone buzzed. The guards looked surprised. No one was supposed to have access to their personal devices here. But when Miguel pulled a sleek, encrypted phone from his pocket, none of them dared say a word. Something about him screamed untouchable. He answered the call with a low voice. "Yes." A distorted voice on the other end replied, "Sir, the situation has escalated. The judge humiliated you publicly. Do you want us to proceed?" Miguel's eyes narrowed, his tone cold and precise. "Not yet. Let her believe she's in control. But prepare everything. If she crosses the line again, we move." The guard nearest him shifted nervously. He couldn't hear the words, but he felt the weight of Miguel's authority. Whoever this man was, he wasn't afraid of judges, prosecutors, or even the system itself. Meanwhile, in her chambers, Judge Whitmore was basking in her perceived victory. She sipped her coffee, smirking, to her clerk. "These people think they can intimidate me, but they all break, they always break." Her clerk hesitated. "Your Honor, with respect, Mr. Alvarez didn't look like a man who breaks." Whitmore scoffed. "Everyone breaks under my gavel. He'll learn humility soon enough." But she didn't know that the very courthouse she presided over had unseen eyes and ears that belonged not to her but to Miguel. Hidden security contractors, anonymous phone calls, surveillance that even federal marshals didn't detect. Miguel's reach extended far beyond the courtroom walls. That evening, Isabel visited Miguel in the holding area. She leaned in close, whispering urgently, "Miguel, what's going on? She's trying to humiliate you, but you don't even flinch. I need to know, who are you really?" For the first time, Miguel's expression softened. He studied her, as though weighing whether she could handle the truth. Finally, he spoke, his voice steady. Do you know why I've never feared walking into a courtroom, Isabel? Because I've spent years watching the law bend for the powerful while crushing the powerless. I've seen judges like Whitmore destroy lives with a stroke of their pen, but I am not powerless, and I am not here by accident. She frowned. Then why are you here? Miguel leaned closer, lowering his voice. Because I wanted to be, to see her up close, to see if the stories about her corruption were true. And now I know. Isabel's heart pounded. You make it sound like you're not the defendant here. You're the one putting her on trial. A small smile flickered across Miguel's face. Exactly. Before she could press further, the guards interrupted, announcing visiting hours were over. Isabel left with more questions than answers. But one thing was clear. Miguel Alvarez wasn't just any man. He was playing a much larger game. Later that night, in a dimly lit parking garage beneath the courthouse, two men in black suits stood, waiting. They weren't law enforcement. They were something else. Military precision in their movements, eyes constantly scanning, earpieces humming softly. One of them spoke into a mic. Alpha 1 is in position. Orders? The response came instantly. Stand by. He said not yet. The man nodded. Copy that. But if the judge pushes again, we go full protocol. The other agent, younger, swallowed hard. Do you really think the judge knows who he is? The older one smirked. If she knew, she wouldn't have opened her mouth. The next morning, the courtroom buzzed again. Word of the judge's harsh treatment of Miguel Alvarez had already leaked to local press. Reporters whispered about racial remarks and judicial misconduct. But Judge Whitmore was unfazed. When Miguel was brought back in, she smirked. I trust your stay in holding taught you humility? Miguel looked at her with the same calm, unnerving eyes. It taught me something, Your Honor. It taught me that even the highest seat in this courtroom can be corrupted. And when corruption sits on the bench, it's not the defendant who should be afraid. It's the judge. A ripple of shock swept. Through the room, Judge Whitmore slammed her gavel. Bailiff, silence this man. But before the bailiff could move, Miguel's encrypted phone buzzed again. He glanced at it, then looked directly at the judge. His voice dropped, deadly calm. Your Honor, you may think you're humiliating a man on trial, but what you don't know is that you're facing the one man this entire system fears. The room froze. Even the reporters stopped writing. Everyone felt it, the shift in power. The judge's smirk faltered for the first time, and in that moment the most feared man in America finally began to reveal who he truly was. The silence in courtroom 6B was suffocating. Reporters clutched their notepads but forgot to write. Lawyers shifted uneasily, and even the bailiff froze mid-step. All eyes were locked on Miguel Alvarez, who stood tall at the defense table, his words echoing like thunder. You're facing the one man this entire system fears. Judge Whitmore gripped her gavel tighter, her knuckles whitening. For the first time in her career, she felt something she wasn't used to in her courtroom: loss of control. Still, her pride refused to yield. Bailiff, restrain him, she barked, but the bailiff hesitated, his hand lingering on his cuffs. Something about Miguel's calm composure made it feel less like he was a defendant, and more like he was the one in charge. Now, she snapped, slamming the gavel. The bailiff stepped forward reluctantly, but before he reached Miguel, the heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom opened with a deliberate creak. Two men in black suits entered, their presence commanding. Immediate attention, sunglasses, earpieces, and the kind of posture only military training could produce. The room fell into whispers. Secret Service, someone muttered. FBI, another guessed. The men didn't address the judge, didn't acknowledge the prosecutor, and didn't even glance at the spectators. They walked directly to Miguel, nodding once. One leaned down and whispered in his ear. Miguel simply gave a small nod in return. Judge Whitmore's voice wavered as she demanded, Who are these men? Bailiff, remove them immediately. The older agent turned his head slowly toward her, removing his sunglasses. His stare was sharp enough to cut glass. "With respect, Your Honor, you're not authorized to give us orders." The courtroom erupted in gasps. The judge's face flushed crimson. "Excuse me, this is my courtroom," Miguel finally spoke, his voice calm, cutting through the chaos like a blade. "No, Judge Whitmore, this is the people's courtroom, and the people have been watching you for a very long time." The prosecutor scrambled to his feet. "This is highly irregular. I demand to know what's going on." Miguel's lips curled into the faintest smile. "You'll know soon enough." The agents handed Isabel a sealed envelope. She opened it, her eyes widening as she skimmed the contents. "Oh my God," she whispered. She turned to the judge. "Your Honor, this is a federal investigation. Notice, you..." Her voice shook as she read it aloud. "You are under active investigation for bribery, obstruction of justice, and abuse of power." The room exploded in murmurs. Reporters scrambled to write. Cameras clicked despite the bailiff's attempts to stop them. Judge Whitmore's jaw dropped. "What nonsense is this? Who dares accuse me?" Miguel took a step forward, his presence dominating the space. "I do. And not just me. Entire agencies. Task forces. People you thought were untouchable. For years, you've humiliated defendants, sold verdicts, buried evidence, and mocked the very law you swore to uphold." His words carried the weight of undeniable truth. Every sentence struck her like a hammer. The judge's mask of superiority cracked. "This is outrageous. I will not be..." Miguel cut her off sharply. "Enough." The single word silenced the room. He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping into a low, commanding tone. "You wanted to humiliate me because of my name, my skin, my heritage. You thought I was just another Latino man you could trample in your courtroom. But what you didn't know is that I am the one judges fear in their nightmares. The man who uncovers secrets, dismantles empires, and topples anyone who thinks their robe makes them untouchable." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "I am the hammer that falls when justice fails." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Isabel looked at him with awe, finally understanding why he'd walked into this trial without fear. He wasn't here to defend himself. He was here to expose her. The judge's hands trembled as she tried to maintain control. This is illegal. You cannot ambush a sitting federal judge in her own courtroom." Miguel straightened his jacket calmly. "You ambushed yourself when you decided the law was your personal weapon. You humiliated me thinking I was powerless. But the most feared man is never the loudest, never the most obvious. He's the one who waits until the exact moment to strike." The younger agent stepped forward, producing a small black folder. He placed it on the judge's bench. She opened it with shaky hands. Inside were photographs, recordings, bank transfers, all evidence of years of corruption. Her breath caught. How did you get this?" Miguel's eyes bore into hers. "Because I have eyes everywhere. The system you thought you controlled, it reports to me when it fails. And you, Judge Whitmore, have failed spectacularly." The courtroom was electric. Reporters scribbled like mad, already planning headlines. Lawyers whispered frantically, distancing themselves from the soon-to-be disgraced judge. Whitmore tried, one last defense. "You think the system will side with you? I am the system." Miguel shook his head slowly, almost pitying her. "No, you were its parasite. And parasites are always removed." At that moment, the doors opened again. This time, it wasn't just two men. It was a team of federal agents, their badges gleaming as they entered. The lead agent announced loudly, "By order of the Department of Justice, Judge Eleanor Whitmore, you are under arrest." The courtroom exploded in chaos. Gasps, shouts, the furious scratching of pens on paper. The judge's face drained of color. "You can't arrest me, I'm a federal judge." Miguel stepped closer, his voice soft but lethal. "No, Eleanor. You were a federal judge. Now you're just another criminal facing justice." The agents closed in, cuffing her wrists. The sound of metal clicking shut was like poetic punctuation to Miguel's words. As she was led past him, Whitmore's eyes burned with hatred. "Who are you?" she hissed. Miguel leaned down, his voice barely above a whisper. "The man who makes sure justice is never denied." She was dragged out screaming while the courtroom buzzed with shock and disbelief. For the first time in years, courtroom 6B wasn't ruled by arrogance, corruption, or fear of the robe. It was ruled by something far greater. It was ruled by Miguel Alvarez, the man even the system feared. By nightfall, the story was everywhere. Federal judge arrested in courtroom meltdown. Shocking corruption scandal in Houston. Latino defendant exposes powerful judge. Every network ran the footage. Every anchor repeated Miguel Alvarez's name. Clips of him standing tall, calm, while Judge Whitmore screamed about her. Authority were replayed endlessly, dissected by talking heads across the country. But while the nation saw a dramatic courtroom takedown, those who understood power, politicians, judges, prosecutors, and even shadowy figures in corporate boardrooms, saw something far more terrifying. A man with reach, intelligence, and audacity to dethrone a federal judge in her own courtroom. And they whispered the same question: who exactly is Miguel Alvarez? In Washington, D.C., inside a secure conference room at the Department of Justice, top officials sat around a long mahogany table. The Attorney General herself stared at the stack of files before her. "This Alvarez situation is bigger than we expected," she said. "The arrest of Judge Whitmore is just the surface. These files, bank transfers, recordings, sealed evidence, none of this should have been accessible to a civilian." A senior advisor leaned forward. "Because he's not a civilian, Madam Attorney General." The room went quiet. The advisor slid a dossier across the table. On the cover, stamped in bold red letters, "Classified, eyes only." Inside were decades of intelligence reports, photos of Miguel with military leaders, political figures, even presidents, records of missions in South America, Europe, and the Middle East. Black Ops operations where his name surfaced only as a ghost, never official, never confirmed. "He's not just anyone," the advisor continued. "He's the man the intelligence community uses when even the CIA won't touch it. He's the cleaner, the shadow, the hammer. You don't call him unless you want absolute results." The Attorney General exhaled slowly, the weight of the revelation pressing on her shoulders. "And now he's standing in our courtrooms, exposing federal judges," another official muttered. "If he can take down a judge that easily, who's next?" Meanwhile, in Houston, Isabel Moreno sat in her small office, staring at the dozens of voicemails and emails flooding her inbox. Media outlets wanted interviews, advocacy groups wanted statements, and law firms were offering her seven-figure contracts. But none of that mattered. What mattered was the man sitting calmly across from her, Miguel Alvarez, sipping coffee as though nothing extraordinary had happened. "You planned all of this, didn't you?" she asked softly. Miguel set down his cup, meeting her gaze. "I planned the opportunity. She supplied the arrogance." Isabel shook her head in disbelief. "You walked into that courtroom knowing she would humiliate you. You let it happen." Miguel's lips twitched into a faint smile. "Arrogant people always show their hand if you give them time. All I had to do was wait." She leaned forward, her voice dropping. "But why expose her now? Why not just stay in the shadows like you always have?" His eyes darkened. "Because justice isn't just about punishing the guilty. It's about reminding the powerful that someone is always watching. She wasn't the first. She won't be the last." Across the city, Judge Whitmore sat in a holding cell, the same kind she once ordered countless defendants into. Her designer suit was wrinkled, her makeup smudged, her hair disheveled. The indignity of it all burned hotter than fire. Her lawyer pressed against the glass. "Eleanor, you need to listen. The evidence against you is overwhelming. Offshore accounts, recordings of backroom deals, witness testimonies. They planted it," she snapped, slamming her hand against the glass. That man planted it?" Her lawyer lowered his voice. "Even if he did, it doesn't matter. The DOJ is treating this like a full-scale operation. Eleanor, I think they're more afraid of him than they are of you." Her blood ran cold. For the first time, the woman who had made countless others feel small realized what true fear tasted like. That night, a news anchor addressed millions of viewers. Who is Miguel Alvarez? Sources say he is connected to shadowy federal task forces, yet no agency will confirm his identity. Some describe him as a whistleblower, others as a vigilante. But one thing is clear: wherever he goes, corruption falls. The screen cut to clips of protesters outside courthouses holding signs, "Justice for all." Thank you, Alvarez. No one above the law. Miguel's name was becoming a symbol, a storm sweeping across the justice system, but not everyone was cheering. In a skyscraper office overlooking New York City, a group of men in tailored suits gathered around a sleek conference table. They weren't politicians or lawyers. They were CEOs, bankers, and power brokers, the kind of men whose wealth bought silence, influence, and immunity. One of them slammed his fist on the table. This Alvarez is a problem. First a judge. Who's next? A senator, a governor, one of us? Another leaned back, adjusting his cufflinks. He's not playing by the rules. He doesn't just want justice, he wants control. If he keeps this up, the entire system we've built comes crashing down. The room fell silent. Then the oldest man, a silver-haired titan of industry, spoke in a low, dangerous voice. Then Alvarez must be dealt with, permanently. Back in Houston, Miguel stood on the balcony of a high-rise, looking out over the city lights. The hum of traffic below blended with the faint sounds of helicopters circling above. His encrypted phone buzzed. A voice spoke through the line. "You've made your move. The country is watching. The powerful are scared, but they won't sit idle. You know what comes next." Miguel's expression didn't change. "I know." He ended the call, his reflection staring back at him in the glass. The feared man had struck his blow, but now the system, and the shadow forces behind it, would strike back, and Miguel Alvarez was ready. The storm broke faster than anyone expected. Within days of Judge Whitmore's arrest, the entire nation was gripped by scandal. Editorials called it a turning point for the justice system. Activists called it vindication. And the powerful, the ones who had always hidden behind money and titles, called it a nightmare. But Miguel Alvarez knew better. He knew the system doesn't crumble from a single blow. When a wall is cracked, those who built it don't rebuild, they reinforce, and that's exactly what they tried to do. It began with surveillance vans outside Isabel Moreno's office. Men in unmarked cars parked near her home. Anonymous calls warning her to drop Miguel's case. She reported it to the police, but the police shrugged. Too vague, too unprovable. Then came the media smear campaign. Pundits on certain networks called Miguel a dangerous radical, a shadow operative, even a cartel kingpin. Old photographs were dragged from archives, twisted out of context. A blurry image of him in South America with soldiers was splashed across headlines. Latino defendant or warlord? Isabel slammed the newspaper on her desk. They're painting you as a villain. Miguel barely glanced at it. Villains don't matter. Only truth does. But Isabel's voice shook. Truth isn't always enough. They're going to come after you, Miguel. Not with trials, not with evidence, with bullets. Miguel finally looked at her, his eyes calm, resolute. Let them try. That night, in a mansion outside of Washington, the secret meeting of power brokers reconvened. The silver-haired CEO at the head of the table tapped his glass. Our assets in the courts are collapsing. Whitmore's arrest emboldened others. If Alvarez isn't neutralized, he'll burn everything we've built. Another man snarled. We've tried the media. We've tried intimidation. He doesn't flinch, so we end him. Silence fell. No one disagreed. The silver-haired man pressed a button, revealing a dossier projected on the wall. Satellite images, maps, movement logs. Miguel Alvarez's life tracked hour by hour. The man's voice was ice. A man who lives in shadows can be destroyed by bringing shadows to him. Gentlemen, it's time. In Houston, Miguel knew the strike was coming. He always knew. The first shot came at midnight. A black SUV roared down his street, windows lowering, muzzles flashing. Bullets tore through the air like lightning, but when the smoke cleared, the SUV's tires had been shredded by spike strips hidden in the asphalt. The shooters, scrambling to reload, found themselves surrounded by men in tactical gear emerging. From the darkness, silencers hissed. In seconds, the attackers were neutralized. Miguel stepped calmly from his home, adjusting his jacket as though he'd been expecting them all along. His men, the same shadowy figures who had appeared in the courtroom, saluted him silently. Isabel, who had been inside, rushed out, her face pale with shock. "Miguel, are you—" He raised a hand, steady. "This is only the beginning. They've declared war." The next day, the country erupted again, not because of a scandal, but because of a leak. Thousands of documents appeared online exposing bribery networks, offshore accounts, secret meetings between judges, senators, and CEOs. Names once thought untouchable were plastered across screens. The source was anonymous. But everyone knew who was behind it. Miguel Alvarez had not only survived the attack, he had struck back. In the DOJ war room, chaos reigned. Senators demanded investigations. Governors called for resignations. The Attorney General rubbed her temples, staring at the growing list of implicated officials. "This isn't just one man," she said quietly. "It's an entire operation. He's dismantling them piece by piece." An advisor muttered what everyone else was thinking. "He's untouchable." Meanwhile, Isabel sat across from Miguel in his office, papers scattered between them. "You realize what you've done, right?" she whispered. "You've pulled the mask off the entire system. They'll never stop hunting you." Miguel leaned back, his face unreadable. "They've hunted me for years. The difference now is that the people know I exist." She studied him. "But why, Miguel? Why risk everything?" For a long moment he was silent. Then he spoke, his voice low, carrying the weight of decades. "Because I've seen what happens when no one stands up. I've seen families destroyed, communities crushed, justice sold to the highest bidder. And I swore, as long as I breathe, no one who abuses power will ever sleep peacefully again." Isabel's eyes burned with tears. "Then you really are the most feared man in America." Miguel's gaze drifted toward the city skyline. Helicopters buzzed in the distance, sirens wailed below, the storm still raging. "No," he said softly, "I am not the most feared man. I am the man who makes the powerful fear justice." Weeks later, Judge Whitmore sat in prison, her name now synonymous with corruption. CEOs were indicted, senators questioned, prosecutors disgraced. And through it all, one name lingered in every whispered conversation of the elite: Miguel Alvarez. Some called him a vigilante, others a savior. But to those who had reason to fear him, he was something else entirely, an inevitability. Because whenever arrogance, corruption, and power collided, Miguel Alvarez was there, waiting. And when he appeared, it was already too late.